The night the fever climbed the walls of Jonah Calder's chest, the wind worried the tin roof like a restless animal, and the old ranch seemed to hold its breath. Jonah lay on his narrow bed, boots still on because taking them off felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to say out loud. The bottle of medicine sat on the nightstand, half full, catching the lamplight in a way that made it look hopeful. He had counted the pills earlier, enough for 3 more days if he took them like the doctor said, maybe 4 if he stretched them. He had smiled at the math like a gambler who knows the deck is stacked and plays anyway. Outside, the pasture rolled dark and wide, a sea of grass he had known since he was a boy. The stars were bright enough to make promises, but Jonah had learned that promises don't heal lungs. He pressed a hand to his ribs and breathed shallow, listening to the wind, thinking of his mother's voice, long gone, telling him that a man's worth wasn't measured by how long he lived, but by what he gave while he was here. He laughed softly at that, the sound breaking into a cough that rattled him until his eyes watered. "You always had a way with words, Ma," he whispered. The knock came after midnight, soft at first, then more urgent, as if the hand making it had run out of strength and time. Jonah pushed himself upright, pain blooming like fire under his skin. No one came to the ranch at that hour unless something had gone wrong. He shuffled to the door, every step a small argument with his body. When he opened it, the wind rushed in, carrying with it the smell of sage and rain and fear. She stood there, a girl wrapped in a thin blanket, her hair dark and tangled, her eyes too bright. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. Behind her, the prairie stretched empty, but Jonah knew better than to think a child like this had walked alone. Somewhere out there, unseen, was a family, a story, a worry that had grown big enough to send a girl to a stranger's door in the middle of the night. "Please," she said, the word trembling like a leaf. "My sister is sick." Jonah felt the weight of the medicine in the room behind him, felt the weight of the years that had taught him how quickly sickness could steal a person. He knelt to be level with her, ignoring the protest in his bones. "What's her name?" he asked. "Lena," the girl said. "She's burning." Jonah nodded. "Fever." He thought of the pills. Thought of the doctor's warning. Thought of the way the nights had been getting longer lately, his breath shorter. He stood and reached for the bottle, his hand hovering over it like a man deciding whether to let go of a ledge. "Come in," he said instead. "Tell me where she is." They rode in Jonah's old truck, the engine coughing awake like a stubborn mule. The girl, Mara, she told him, clutched the blanket and stared ahead, lips moving in a silent prayer. Jonah drove with one hand, the other pressed against his chest, focusing on the rutted road and the way the headlights cut through the dark. He had lived long enough to know when a choice was being made, even if he hadn't said the words yet. The camp lay in a shallow valley near the cottonwoods, tents low and dark, a small fire smoldering like an ember refusing to die. Faces appeared in the light as Jonah pulled up, wary, hopeful, afraid. An older woman stepped forward, her hair silver, her eyes sharp as winter. She studied Jonah, then the bottle in his hand, and nodded once. Inside one of the tents, Lena lay wrapped in blankets, her skin too hot, her breathing too fast. Jonah knelt again, his joints screaming, and placed a cool hand on her forehead. He had seen this before in men twice her size brought low by sickness that didn't care about strength or pride. He crushed the pill with the back of a spoon, mixed it with water, and coaxed it past her lips. He did it again, and again, measuring carefully, thinking of the hours it might buy her. "Will she live?" Mara asked. Jonah swallowed. "She has a chance," he said. It was the truth, and sometimes the truth was enough to keep hope alive. He left the bottle with them, all but one pill gone. As he turned back toward the truck, the older woman caught his sleeve. "This was your medicine," she said, not a question. Jonah met her gaze. "It was," he said. "Now it's hers." The drive back felt longer, the road rougher. By the time Jonah reached the ranch, dawn was a pale promise on the horizon, and the fever had found him again. He lay down without taking the last pill, because the choice had already been made, and slept the way exhausted men do, deep and without dreams. Morning brought pain like a hammer. Jonah woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch, steady and unafraid. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, but then there was a knock, firm and respectful. He pushed himself upright, every breath a negotiation, and opened the door. The man standing there was tall and quiet, wrapped in a long coat, his hair braided with feathers that caught the light. His eyes were dark pools of calm, and when he spoke, his voice was low and sure. "I am Toma," he said. "I have come to sit with you." Jonah blinked. "You're the shaman," he said, feeling foolish for stating the obvious. Toma nodded. "Lena is breathing easier," he said. "She will live." Something in Jonah's chest loosened, not the sickness, but a knot he hadn't known was there. "That's good," he said, and meant it with everything he had left. Toma stepped inside, carrying the smell of herbs and rain with him. He sat at Jonah's bedside without ceremony, as if this were the most natural place in the world to be. "You gave what you needed to live," Toma said. "Why?" Jonah shrugged, then winced. "I've had a good run," he said. "Long enough to know that life doesn't belong to us. We just borrow it." Toma studied him for a long moment. "You believe that," he said. "I do," Jonah said. "Doesn't make it easier to breathe, though." Toma smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It does not." They sat in silence for a while, the room filled with the sound of Jonah's labored breathing and the soft rustle of the wind outside. Toma took out a small pouch and began to prepare a tea, his movements slow and deliberate, each one a promise of care. He spoke of plants and stories, of listening to the body as if it were a river, not something to be fought but understood. Jonah listened, not because he believed this would save him, but because the act of being listened to, of being seen, had always been its own kind of medicine. He told Toma about the ranch, about the drought years and the good years, about his mother and the way she sang when she cooked. He talked until the words ran out and all that was left was the truth of the moment. When the tea was ready, Toma held it to Jonah's lips. "Drink," he said. "Not because it will cure you, but because it will help." Jonah drank. The warmth spread through him, gentle and kind. He closed his eyes and felt the day move forward, felt the light shift, felt himself anchored by the simple presence of another human being who had come because a child lived. As the hours passed, people came to the ranch, Mara first, her eyes shining, then Lena, wrapped in blankets but smiling, then others, quiet and grateful. They brought food and stories and a sense of belonging that filled the house like sunlight. Jonah lay there, weaker than he had ever been, and yet somehow stronger, held up by something that had nothing to do with his lungs. That night, as the stars came out again, Jonah's breathing eased. It wasn't a miracle in the way people like to tell stories, there was no sudden strength, no leap from bed. But there was relief, and there was peace. Toma sat with him, singing softly, a song without words that felt like a hand on Jonah's back, steady and sure. In the days that followed, Jonah lived. The doctor came, surprised but careful, adjusting treatment, bringing more medicine when it arrived. Jonah took it this time, grateful but unchanged in his understanding of what mattered. Lena grew stronger, running in the pasture with Mara, their laughter a sound Jonah had not known he was missing. When spring came, the grass returned, green and generous. Jonah walked the fence line with a cane, his steps slow but purposeful. He watched the girls chase a calf and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. On a quiet evening, Jonah sat on the porch with Toma, the two men watching the world settle into dusk. "You didn't save me," Jonah said, not accusing, just honest. Toma nodded. "No," he said. "You did not need saving. You needed reminding." Jonah smiled. He thought of the night, the knock, the bottle, the choice. He thought of his mother's voice and the way it had been right all along. "I guess," he said, "that sometimes giving away what you need is how you find what you were missing." Toma stood, preparing to leave. "Kindness travels," he said. "It leaves footprints." As the shaman walked back toward the valley, Jonah felt the truth of that settle into him. His life, once a narrow path between fences, had widened in ways he could not have imagined. He breathed in the cool air, slow and careful, and felt hope, not as a promise of forever, but as a gratitude for now. And in that moment, on a quiet ranch under a wide American sky, Jonah Calder understood that the measure of a life is not how tightly it is held, but how freely it is given, and that sometimes, in giving, we are given back more than we ever thought possible.